Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing very good. How are you?
I'm good. So today we are going to talk about Vivek Ramaswamy,
Yeah,
Republican candidate for president.
yes, Vivek is running for president. He's a very interesting character on the Republican side, and he's been popping up in the news lately because he made a splash in the recent Republican debate. He comes from the pharmaceutical world. He was a CEO, but he quit that job to run for president. So it's he also comes from the libertarian side of the political spectrum, and he talks a lot about liberty and capitalism. In some sense, he sounds like a fan of Ayn Rand. I don't actually know if he's read Ayn Rand, but he certainly fights for some of the same ideas that Rand fought for. So I want to know if Vivek is the real deal or not, because there's also some skepticism around him. For example, we're going to go into an interview he did with Anomaly. Anomaly doesn't like Vivek and thinks he's, wrong on a lot of things or lying. So we want to know, is he the real deal? Is he actually for capitalism? Is he speaking the truth and that sort of thing?
Sure. I have my own skepticism. And like you said, we do have other clips besides Anomaly, also some from some people in the Ayn Rand world, which may give a little bit of an indication. One of those is that Vivek was interviewed by Alex Epstein, and well-known objectivist thinker, specializes in energy policy. And in this first clip, Alex asks Vivek what inspired him to challenge the establishment while he was part of it.
Learned a useful lesson in my short-lived stint in stand-up comedy, and that was to carry around a notebook wherever you go. I actually have it, handy today. I mostly carry it around wherever I go. And the thing you're supposed to do is anytime something strikes you, especially if something you find annoys you, you're supposed to write it down. That actually led me to start the company I did. I carried around the notebook during my time as an investor. There were a bunch of things that annoyed me about the managerial class in big pharma that effectively gave me the blueprint for starting the company that I did. But I kept up that practice. And one of the things I found myself jotting down a lot in late 2019, in early 2020, was the 180-degree shift in corporate culture, where all of a sudden, every company, every peer, every startup founder, every venture investor was just saying the exact same thing at the same time about how businesses had to serve not just their shareholders, but their so-called stakeholders. And I was not in a diminishing way, but just in a very curious way, not in a diminutive way, but just very curious way. What does this mean? What's behind this trend? Why is everyone saying this exact same thing at the same time? There was something that annoyed me and got under my skin about the sheer conformity of it.
Yeah, I like how Vivek is obsessed with carrying a notebook around and jotting down things that annoy him. I do a similar thing. I have a notebook, but I write down all my good ideas. I kind of focus on the good instead of the things that annoy me. but but the thing he does with the notebook is interesting because it shows that he treats ideas seriously. I think he wants to introspect a lot. He's in his own head a lot, so that's a good thing, unless it's to the extreme where he's ignoring reality. But I think he is looking out in reality and getting ideas from it, and then noting what he's thinking. And that's a good thing to me. He's introspective. He wants to solve problems. So his focus is on things that annoy him. So he wants to fix the world, right? So he's a problem solver, and that's what you need as a president.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
I don't mind the fact that he's focused more on annoyances than on, the good. I mean, sometimes I'm all about gratitude, but I mean, sometimes these days people almost fetishize it. And sometimes growth comes from, what actually annoys you or you're not comfortable with to get you moving. And keeping a log is also good for when people try to rewrite history. But the most striking part to me is how he realized that all these companies started doing the ESG and DEI mantras at the same time. You know, some people, even in the liberty movement, still imply that these are just businesses all just making their own private decisions as if there's no pressure from anyone.
Yeah, that's an important thing. The thing that annoyed him was this sudden occurrence, the sudden movement, the ESG. And we should probably tell people that that stands for environmental, social, and governance. I had actually had to look that up. So there's this ESG movement going on in the business world, and he noticed it, and since he was in that environment, and so that's what annoyed him, and that's a good thing. That's like a an instinctive thing that was good about him, where he noticed this is a problem. But what's going on here, and what do I do about it, right? And I like that aspect of him, is that he was on the inside of the ESG movement, seeing it from the pharmaceutical business world, and he wants to figure it out, and it sounds like we're going to learn that he wants to attack it and get rid of it because he thinks it's a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's at least saying the right things. In this next clip, he talks about how stakeholder capitalism has turned elites into moralists.
The way in which the expansive role of corporations in America and elsewhere to take on problems that were supposed to be solved by other spheres of our lives, by the democratic process, through the political process, through free speech and open debate as citizens in the public square, those kinds of questions, like how you fight climate change, how you fight systemic racism, pick your pill of choice. Those were questions that I felt every citizen, be it the elite corridors, the people who inhabited the elite corridors of America that I'd inhabited for the last 15 years, or be it the people in Southwest Ohio, closer to where I had been born, had an equal stake in answering. And I began to worry that the people who I had surrounded myself with, the people who muse about the racially unjust impact of climate change in Davos, ended up co-opting for themselves greater moral power, normative power, the power to determine our moral norms in ways that betrayed my understanding of what it meant to be a citizen of a democratic republic like the United States.
I think here he is recognizing an important problem with our society, but I don't think he's naming it correctly or describing it correctly, because what I think he's witnessing is the transition into a sort of fascistic communist state. And that's when the government and the business world merge together, and everything becomes the government's prerogative, or the government's territory. And so now that he saw them influencing the pharmaceutical world with their political power, the clubs they yield, like antitrust and all of that. But he's thinking of it in terms of the corporations expanding their power into the moral realm. But I think what's really going on is the corporations fear being broken up by the government, and so they're appeasing the government, and they're bowing to the political pressure. So it's interesting that he's on the inside of this movement, seeing this transition to a new political order, but he's kind of describing it in a misinterpretive way.
Yeah, I just, again, he's giving us a story about why he's turned on these elites, but I have a question about the timeline. I mean, some of this stuff started being apparent, in the last 5-6 years, but he was still, being critical of Republicans, after the 2020 election. And it just, I look, if he, we know he took some Soros scholarship money that we're going to get into that clip later. It was actually Soros's brother. But, within that, there's, I want to know that he's actually kind of morally repudiated that position, because somebody that was just trying to be a faux populist would say things like this. and would have a story about why they turned.
Yeah, that's a concern. I see that. What he would say to that is that he wasn't born into the Republican world. You know, he comes from a more liberal side of things, and you know, there's this video going around of him asking a question at some Democratic town hall. So I think he grew up probably with more Democratic or liberal leanings, and he's just recently come to some, you know, enlightenment, or he had an epiphany when he saw this problem with the ESG and all this woke nonsense. And so he's a bright guy, but even geniuses can't come to the right conclusions if they don't have the right facts. So I think maybe he just wasn't in the right context to understand, what was going on in the world at an earlier stage. Like, he didn't learn this in high school or anything, or even in college. He learned it in the business world after he'd already been, making his money. So he comes from a different context in that regard. But I think it's a good sign that he's coming around and he's trying to explain how he came to this transition, or how he became a person on the right of the political spectrum and more conservative in his views. So I understand the skepticism, but I'm not sure there's enough evidence to condemn him and think of him as a phony. I think he might just be confused. He's still in that sort of confusing transitional state. But he does. I think he's going in the right direction.
Okay, all right. We'll reserve judgment for now. In this next clip, Vivek is trying to solve the problem of a concentration of capital wielded by an ideological cartel.
I've spent the last couple of years thinking about this problem, the problem posed by the concentration of capital in the hands of an ideological cartel that's wielding $20 trillion of capital. That's more than the US GDP, in ways that advance this monolithic politicized viewpoint under the banner of three-letter acronymized capitalism, be it CSR, corporate social responsibility, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, ESG, environmental social governance factors, CCP, pick your favorite three-letter acronym of choice. That was
That's Chinese Communist Party, for those who don't know.
Yeah. CSR to CCP. It's kind of a spectrum. ESG sits somewhere in between.
So again, here I think he's identifying the problem. He's seeing what's going on, but he might not have the right vocabulary or context to accurately describe it and understand what needs to be done. I'm not sure he understands how these companies became cartels. Like, why is big pharma a cartel in his mind? So there may be some confusion around how that happens, and I think it happens through government force intruding on these companies and then asking for favors, and then there's this government intrusion into the business world, and so you get this,
but then businesses embrace it to some point, to varying degrees. Some want the regulation as guidance. Some want high barriers to entry for competition.
Yeah, so you can see them, like, they just bend the knee and then they do the bidding of the government, or they want it. They want that power, and so they crave it, and they crawl to the government asking for the power. And so it's you got to look at each case individually and figure out, is this company evil, because they're willingly they're willingly doing the bidding of the government, and so in a sense they're just an arm of the state? Or are they just like cowing to the government and just doing the minimum necessary to appease the government?
When does a Hank Rearden become an Orrin Boyle?
Exactly. So that's a problem, and it's hard to figure that out unless you're on the inside. You don't know their secret communications, so you kind of look at the outward manifestations, and maybe you can tell from that, because they're obviously craving the power or something like that. But so I like the idea that Vivek is seeing this from the inside and has a sort of unique take on it because he is seeing it from the inside, and he's come to some of the same conclusions that we objectivists have come to. He just came from from a different perspective, and is using different language to describe what he's seeing, but in the sense of the general take of things, we're both attacking the rise of the new fascism. And that's how I see it. I just
Right.
maybe Vivek won't describe it that way, but the way he's describing it sounds a lot like the way Rand described it.
Yeah, some of that concentration of capital almost has left tinge, but where he goes with it, I agree with that it's being concentrated by these, kind of woke do-gooders to remake society in their vision. I give him credit for at least being so, anti-ESG in his rhetoric. Absolutely, he's just talking about, but it's almost become fashionable. But in this next clip with Alex, Vivek explains how to compete against an anti-competitive movement, and he talks about his Strive asset management.
If you have an anti-competitive problem in the market, great. How about trying market competition as an answer? So that's the journey I embarked on by starting a new firm that is competing directly with those big three asset management firms that represent the ideological cartel, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. We have a new firm called Strive Asset Management that is built on a very similar principle of investing capital in the markets, but with one key distinguishing feature to our mission. That is to represent the voice of the everyday citizen in corporate America's boardrooms by telling companies to focus exclusively on excellent products and services for their customers over any other agenda, including political or social agendas. That includes the kind of agendas that BlackRock is pushing on much of corporate America, including the energy industry. And I hope that by the time we are done, there will be no such thing as a big three left in asset management. There will be a true diversity of viewpoints represented in the boardrooms of America's companies, including in important industries like the one that you're focused on, that better track the true diversity of the views of actual citizens in a way that cures that fiduciary breach. So that's a big part of what we're doing.
So he talks a good game, and I like a lot of what he says, and I think it would work if we lived in a free market. But what I think the problem is that he's got his solution that he came to is not recognizing the context of our political situation. We're in a mixed economy, and I don't think a market solution, a free market solution, like he's going to compete with the anti-competitive ESG and all that with a competitive firm, Strive. I don't know if that's going to work because he's not recognizing the true mechanism of how we're moving to fascism, which is from the government force. So if he recognized that, he would understand the motives of these pseudo-free companies, the companies that are nominally private, but actually, private public institutions.
Right.
So he's not recognizing that problem. And so those companies have pressure from the government to act the way they do. But he wants to exert pressure from the free market to change the market. But I don't know if that's going to work, because how's that going to influence a company that's under the thumb of the government?
Right. The market forces are under duress as well, because I see regulators coming after this company, or at least the threat of it scaring off new investors. I don't blame him for trying to make money off of it, but these people, the companies under duress and the people under duress, these corporate leaderships know that they will be replaced if they just focus on profit and say loudly, I'm against DEI and ESG. That's where it needs to be fought. I wonder if he's running to win or to gain exposure to his fund.
Yeah, it's a bit of a problem here, because I know he's a smart guy. He's probably almost genius level the way he talks and can argue for things. But if he takes a step back, I'm hoping someone can convince him that he needs to go harder, against these corporations that are either bending the knee, or craving or power lusting, and working willingly with the government. He needs to recognize that the fascism is coming from the government force. Otherwise, he's gonna be in the situation where he's talking to a company and saying, you should focus on making better products instead of this cultural nonsense. And then the company gets pressure from the government, who's saying, if you don't do this cultural nonsense, we're going to break up your company. So which choice do you think the company is going to make? Are they going to obey the government, who has the power to break up their company, or just regulate them to death? Or are they going to listen to some Strive asset manager guy who's saying, hey, you should make a better widget in your factory? It's just, it's not in our political context. We're on the verge of requiring a revolution, and he doesn't seem to understand that.
Yeah, having a board resolution may not be good enough. But next, Vivek was also interviewed by Anomaly. How would you describe him? He's a former Bernie bro, but now somewhat conservative post-COVID.
I barely follow Anomaly, but I think he's more of just a straight like libertarian type, like his own sort of libertarian. He's on his own. He's a big name, in the political commentary world. So he is more right-leaning, I think, more conservative, but he doesn't like Trump, and he doesn't like Vivek. So I don't think he would vote for the typical Democrat, but he probably is more leaning towards the progressives like Bernie. Yeah, but I think he might.
He's not just a lefty. I mean, I could tell from his questions. I mean, he was hardcore against the establishment on COVID. That was this Anomaly guy. But and to his credit, he appreciated Vivek for going into what he admitted was hostile territory.
Yeah, and he so he's kind of a mixture. He's one of those mixed progressives, I think, in that
Okay.
He's his own guy. He doesn't really follow anybody too closely, so you never know like what his take is going to be. I think that's been my experience.
Sure. No, I liked him from what I saw. In this first clip, Vivek is asked about shaming conservatives for not wearing masks during COVID, and he, to his credit, admits to cringing at his past remarks.
I'm gonna read this tweet real quick. It's from 7/9/2020. Understandable, right? Things are changing, etc. You said wear a mask equals personal responsibility. It's puzzling when conservatives oppose it. So you were kind of pushing the mask thing, and I've heard interviews where you said that was just the libertarian in you. Is that your stance on that? That you were so libertarian that you were shaming conservatives for not wearing masks?
I have a couple of things to say about it. One is, I think every Republican politician who's running for president certainly has said something about the COVID policies in the early phases and over the last several years that we all look back and cringe at. I do. I cringe at that right now. I'm man enough to admit it. I think some other people aren't, but that's a fact.
Is that a subtle Trump dig about some people aren't man enough to admit it?
Yeah, I think he is kind of digging at the other people in the race. But I do like how Vivek learns from his mistakes and is willing to admit his past mistakes. There's some potential for him to learn from other mistakes. So that's another thing about him keeping the notebook. You kind of suggested that it might be he's trying to rewrite history. But I think it might be that he's just trying to learn,
Yeah, no, I
when
didn't mean he
you-
was rewriting history. It's a good, keeping a notebook like that's a good way to stop others from trying to rewrite history on you.
Oh, right. So he can remember, what everyone has said, all the facts and everything. So I think
And
that's a good indication that he's interested in improving his mind, getting to the truth, figuring things out, because it seems like he is, writing down, facts. It has to be a fact for him to solve the problem. So he writes down the annoying facts, and but
I guess for me, the issue is I have a good memory as well, so I may not write everything down like that, but this tweet that he referenced wasn't March of 2020, it was July of 2020. And I saw, Anomaly's reaction video, and he pointed out that Vivek was a CEO of a pharma company still at this time. And maybe he felt compelled to say that. But by this point, Fauci was already backing masks after they'd, had enough.
yeah,
So by July 2020, he wasn't taking an opposite position.
right. Yeah. I think we might be playing another clip where he lays out his motivation for his position back then, but I think it is a problem. There is some chronological issue there, and I take issue with the way he describes his decision making. He says that his libertarian instinct kicked in, and so he did the opposite of what the government was telling him to do.
Right. Let's play that clip.
Yeah, let's play that.
Now, I will tell you what happened in early 2020. I think you probably remember this. Other people should too. The government literally was telling people not to buy masks. Anthony Fauci was saying it. My wife, she's an airway surgeon. They're telling her in the hospital, you don't want to wear N95 masks around. So if the government's telling you not to buy a mask, yes, my native instincts do kick in, and I go in the other direction of anytime somebody tells me to do something. Sometimes that gets the better of me, and that did get the better of me there.
But you see, if Fauci was already against masks, that seems more like a story they came up with after the fact.
Yeah, he's either misremembering, getting confused with the dates, or he's bullshitting, because he describes his motivation as like a natural instinct, and he recognizes that sometimes that fails him. Like his listening to his instincts is not the best option. So he's admitting to not reasoning everything out, and this is a big problem, and probably one of the biggest red flags I have with him is that he didn't sit down and think, well, what is the best policy regarding masks? Should I look at some studies, or should I think about it rationally? Is some little virus gonna not get through my mask because of this thin piece of cloth? They all you have to do is watch somebody blow smoke out of their mouth through a mask and to know that it's not going to work. So he clearly wasn't thinking about this issue, and he just came up with some spontaneous off the cuff policy, and that's a bad sign. That
I mean, if I'm being honest, I appreciate his candor, and I actually identify with the skepticism of wanting to take the opposite approach. It may not seem completely objective, but there may be a context for it if people have completely lied to you over and over again.
Yeah, but we're talking about your life, if you believe COVID is actually this dangerous virus, are you just going to do the opposite of what the government tells you because that's what the government's telling you? Or are you going to actually think about your life and what's good for your life? Should I be wearing a mask? I mean, maybe masks do help, I don't, I'm not a scientist. I haven't conducted some study on it. So that should be, as a bright guy, as, a guy who went to Harvard, he should be thinking about this thing. He should have a critical thinking process about it. That's what I did, and I realize it's ridiculous to wear masks. They're probably more harmful than helpful. So
But him being so open about being reactive like that is another, I think, piece of circumstantial evidence that it was an excuse.
he
For,
might be just excusing it. True. We don't know though. I mean,
well, we
but
know that he wasn't disagreeing with Fauci by July of 2020.
yeah, that's another thing. I think Anomaly brought this up in the interview, is that why didn't he change his mind, after Fauci became pro-mask? So it's if he's just a reaction, if he's the opposite reactionary, where he like reacts to what the government tells you in the opposite way and does the reverse of it, then why isn't he just doing everything the opposite every time they change their minds? Because I think at the core of his personality, or his thinking, is that there is some critical thinking going on, but maybe he didn't want to admit to what he actually thought back then, maybe because he knows it was stupid. And so he came up with this even dumber rationale, which which makes him look even worse. But sometimes people will do that. They
Yeah.
hide the truth of their motives and give you something that they think you'll accept, but you're too smart and you realize, well, that's even dumber. So a lie, lying to cover up something isn't usually the best policy. And
Lying
I'm
about
not
your
saying,
motives is much more common.
yeah, because maybe he thinks no one can figure out his real motive, so this will be taken as his real motive.
So, in this next clip, Vivek is saying that he, despises crony capitalism and wants to rescind special liability protections for vaccine makers.
I think
Wondering, like,
Operation Warp Speed, in retrospect, was an example of crony capitalism. And I despise crony capitalism, whether it's electric vehicle subsidies, whether it's picking favorites among people who manufacture vaccines. I believe that we should rescind the special liability protections that apply to vaccine manufacturers.
nice.
Those are my policy positions.
So he describes crony capitalism here. Operation Warp Speed was an example of it. But how did Warp Speed begin? I don't know all the details, but it seems to me that it was government coming in and saying, hey, pharmaceutical companies, you better get some fire under your ass and get this vaccine made right quick, or else. And then as the carrot on top, they're going to give you a lot of money. The government is going to just send boatloads of money to you so you can sell these vaccines to us. And then you're going to have a guaranteed income, revenue stream from the government. And we're going to be buddies, and that's where the problem is. And I don't think he is articulating that or doesn't even understand it. So he calls it crony capitalism, but what's really happening is it's degrading capitalism. It's becoming fascism.
Yeah, I'm torn on this. I mean, I definitely see his perspective. Even Anomaly was cheering him on, but there could be unintended consequences to removing liability protections for anyone in today's litigious culture. And, part of the reason drug companies charge so much is for their litigation risk over a range of drugs. I mean, generally, I'd like to see more liability protections for risk takers. I think that was part of the spirit of the right to try legislation. So
I don't know. That
I
could
just
be
don't want, no one making a vaccine.
Yeah, but if it's not profitable, then maybe it shouldn't be done. I mean, maybe we don't need this vaccine.
I mean, what about the
Maybe
polio vaccine?
maybe the vaccine, everything about the vaccine. Well, we're just talking about the COVID vaccine.
Well, I
So
mean, but he's talking about removing special liability protections for vaccine makers. Does that not exist on previous vaccines? I'm not 100% sure.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'd have to look that up. So I don't know. Generally, I think that if you're the manufacturer of a product that harms people, you should be liable. I think that's the core of the
Do you agree that people should be able to sign that right over for like right to try for experimental drugs?
so that would be the way to solve it, I think. Yes, to have a contract. So if you accept the vaccine from why couldn't this be settled through a contract? If you're saying if the manufacturer of the vaccine makes you sign a liability waiver, and you say I am willingly participating in this experimental drug or whatever, then the company won't be liable if you die. Um, maybe there could be some tweaking, or I don't know the law, but maybe there's some legal arrangement that would need to be changed or modified once the vaccine is, gone through the experimental stage and is now more stable. And so like only a small fraction of people will get injured or die from it. Then their liability will be generally waived, through some.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that has to be worked out from a legal perspective. I don't think it's, like I said, I'm torn on it.
Yeah,
So,
that's a conversation. I think that could fill up a whole show. I think
that's true. In this next clip, Vivek is asked about tweeting a compliment to George Soros when Soros turned on China.
Now that you're running for Republican president, do you think tweeting "well said George Soros" looks good? And also, when you say enemy of open societies, George Soros's worldview of open society is a worldview I don't subscribe to. So
Yeah.
What do you think that means?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you know what? Probably doesn't sound good, but you know what? In that narrow instance, I actually do stand by it because I think Xi Jinping is the greatest threat that we face, and we got to wake up to it. Communist China is the number one threat that we face. And so, yes, think about this, right? I've already published Woking. Put yourself in my headspace because this actually allows people to understand what's going on. I've been critical of George Soros heading into that. But even if George Soros is going to say something in the Wall Street Journal at a time when Republicans are still bending the knee to Xi Jinping, and he says Xi Jinping is the greatest threat to free societies, and you know what? I knew what I was doing. I said that even this guy,
not free societies, open societies, which is the name of his foundation.
That's the name of his article. And I posted it on Twitter and I said, well said, because you know what? Xi Jinping is the biggest threat we face. And so just because somebody I disagree with vehemently on a lot of issues, because they say Xi Jinping's bad, that's not going to make me say Xi Jinping's good.
that kind of conflicts with his rationale before.
That's right.
When he was pro-mask because the government was saying don't wear a mask.
And it's not even, again, we talked about this earlier, but the guy took $50K from Soros's brother as a scholarship. And even today, he said, I've been critical of Soros, but he didn't actually say what the criticisms were. It's he's looking for a place to agree with him. I mean, let him talk about the threat of Soros buying up district attorneys all over the country.
Yeah,
I remember Soros went after China because they were moving closer to Russia after Ukraine. But I think Soros and China are more like bickering partners negotiating future globalist rules.
Perhaps I'd have to look into it more. I don't know a whole lot about George Soros. I kind of just ignore the left now. But I think that it is, one thing, I like how he's anti-China because he speaks my language when he talks about the problems China faces and how they're our number one enemy. I agree with all that. I think we need to separate our economy from China and get our feet out of that country. Businesses should stop doing business over there. And if we need to, I think the government should enforce some sort of economic boycott or embargo against China. We should take it that far because our economy is getting too tied up with China, and China is a communist country. Why should we be doing business with them or even allowing business with them? So that's my take on that. But I do see, an issue with him taking money from the Soros brother. I forget his name. But he does. Vivek would just say that that was a merit scholarship, which that's a question because apparently it was money for immigrants. So I don't know if that is that riding the line between, you know, a merit scholarship and some other type of scholarship, like a race-based scholarship. Um, what would qualify as an immigrant
I mean,
for
the
that
bottom
scholarship?
line is he willing to unload on Soros? You know, or was he affected by the money?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. He says there were no strings attached. So I don't know, but we don't have all the personal
He
details. We're
feels
taking
moral strings if all he can say is, I've been critical of Soros without getting more specific.
Well, I haven't done a deep dive into his criticism of George Soros, but
I'm sure it'd have to be a very deep dive indeed.
well, I don't know about that. I mean, if someone asked him, maybe he would give a good answer. Oh, I had one more point about that clip. So he talks about putting yourself in his headspace, you know, to try to understand his context back then. Um, so I think that's a good sign, is that he's a man about context, and so he understands that issue about knowledge and action and motivation. And so I think there's potential there for him to change his headspace, you know, and change his context, and come to a better understanding of the economic situation. So there, you know, there's a lot of things I assume that you learn when you're president. You know, all these secrets, and you get all these advisors telling you different things, and so you learn a lot more about the country and about how things work. And I think it would be good to have someone like him in the White House, you know, getting that context and then learning from it and trying to figure out solutions.
Yeah, assuming the intel agencies would even give him the same level of detail they'd give a more favored president.
You know, I'm worried that once the intel agencies start giving him information, they might decide to assassinate him if he doesn't do what they want.
I mean, people have made that speculation about several of the last presidents, so we'll see. But Yaron Brook, chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, has had some comments about Vivek as well, including his debate performance. But back in July, just as Vivek was moving into third place, Yaron doesn't think he could support Vivek.
Since you don't like GOP top three, Trump, DeSantis, Vivek's not a top three. No way Vivek's a top three. You'll likely be backing the Democrat again, so do you prefer Biden or Newsom? I'm not backing anybody, and I'm not voting, but I prefer Biden only because I think he's less competent. The last thing we need as a country is a competent leftist running the country. That would be horrible. But yes, I can't support Trump, DeSantis, or Vivek, and I can't support Biden or Newsom or anybody. I'm not going to support anybody. I'm going to attack them all, and I think they're all horrible. You know, somebody says Vivek is almost up to DeSantis in some polls. He might actually be third. Maybe. I mean, you know, I support the sane Republican candidates, primarily Nikki Haley and Tim Scott. Those are the two that I support within the Republican Party.
Oh, did he just call Vivek not sane? He says he supports the sane candidates, and he didn't name Vivek.
Yeah, it's basically one of the milquetoast caving moderates, or he's backing Biden. I mean, notice he doesn't want to believe that Vivek could be in third place until someone corrects him. He also refuses to see that a bunch of West Wing policy wonks, along with Bernie's team, have been competent enough to bring DEI and ESG mainstream in the last few years, you know, put inflation off the charts. I mean, basically implementing Bernie's agenda enough that Bernie is backing Biden's reelection. I mean, Yaron seems to imply the culture's just doing fine right now. He claims he can't support anyone, but then says right after that, oh, well, I could handle some of these South Carolina moderates. It's like he gets to say, I gave him a chance to put up a moderate, and I might have supported them, and it wasn't just that I wanted to go with the Democrats all along. I mean, if he thinks only nominating a moderate can win the election, as if McCain and Romney did so well.
Yeah, I don't know about moderates. I don't think they're gonna win anymore. We're in extreme country now. It's either you go with the anti-establishment guy or the establishment guy. We're, like I said before, I think we're on the brink of some sort of major catastrophe here, and it's a cultural war happening, and it may not be a shooting war, it may not come to that, but we're definitely in some hot cultural war, and he doesn't seem to recognize that. He's not picking a side. He's trying to ride the fence, and he doesn't see how someone like Nikki Haley probably can't win. It's got to be some charismatic, powerful guy who can speak, about anything and be authentic.
Well, he thinks she could win the general, but not the primary.
Well, what's the point of that then?
Right. Well, he's just saying that if the Republican Party were saying they would nominate one of the sane candidates, as he calls it.
Yeah, but he's dreaming. So that's one of the problems with Yaron. He lives in his future fantasy world, and so if
what's it? He's going to dictate his terms to Republicans who they have to nominate for him not to back the Dems again.
Yeah, it's just what he says doesn't make any sense. So you have to win the primary. So you got to have someone who can win the primary. If you want to pick Nikki Haley in the primary, go for it. But is she going to win? I don't know, maybe. It doesn't look that way. It certainly doesn't. If someone like Vivek can topple Nikki Haley, Vivek doesn't have any experience at all.
But if they're just going to cave to the left like Bush did anyway and try to be liked, what's the use of having someone in there? They can have all the best rhetoric, but if they're not a fighter, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, what we need now is someone who's willing to go into the government, go into the White House, and take a wrecking ball to it. That's what you need. And with someone who has some modicum of common sense and can make decisions based on the facts. Even if he makes a slightly wrong decision, I think Vivek will come to some better solution than what we've got now. And Nikki Haley probably, I don't know much about her actually, but she probably is not as charismatic if she's not doing as well. So how's she even going to get to the White House? You need someone who people will vote for. That's the situation we're living in. And you pick the guy who can get voted in, who has the best ideas, or the best personality, the best character. Something you like about him. I didn't like everything about Trump, but I like that he respected the fountainhead. He saw himself as an Ayn Rand character. I mean, that's even if he's wrong, I mean, he still sees that. He still admires that.
Right.
Well, also he had a lot of good policy positions. He wanted to cut regulations. He was against the wars. So I mean, there's a lot of good things about Trump that people don't seem to focus on.
Sure. Well, by August, Yaron is actually being asked if Vivek can be trusted after endorsing Trump. And Yaron seems to be willing to give Vivek kind of a backhanded pass that he might not really mean what he's saying.
It's hard to tell whether Vivek is doing that because he really believes it, or whether he's doing that because that is what is required in order to win the Republican nomination. I don't know, and I don't know how to separate it out, but I agree with you. But, you know, everybody's defending Trump as president. Every single one of the Republicans, including Nikki Haley and DeSantis, they all think Trump was a great president. They all say that. So he's not different in that sense. You have to, that's kind of a starting, they all start at that low level of trying to appease the base, which is, you know, should not be appeased because, well, I mean, but you win, you have to. What can you do?
You have to appease the base, but you shouldn't. So, I don't know. I think Yaron just hates the Republican base for liking Trump, but that's really a kind of a straw man, because as you know, as a Republican voter, just the general Republican voter, you don't choose who decides to enter the race. You know, individuals choose to go into the presidential race or not. And Trump was one of them, and Vivek is one of them, and Nikki Haley's one of them. And as a voter, you just got to pick, you know, which one you like better. You're not in charge of like you can't go to some guy and say, hey, you better run for the race because you're the best guy for it. And, you know, they got to decide that on their own. And so maybe the best person who should be president is just some farmer, you know, in Iowa. You know, he's not, and he doesn't care. He doesn't want to run for president. That's not his life's ambition. So I don't know what Yaron expects from the Republican voter other than to vote for who they think is the best candidate. He wants to call them names and say the Republican base is horrible and they don't, you know, they vote for the wrong people and that's why the Republican Party's all messed up. But he seems to be forgetting that, you know, the whole culture's messed up, and it's half of it is evil basically, you know, because they're voting for Biden. And
Yeah.
you know, in my view, you got to have some mean streak in you to vote for Biden.
Maybe we could
That's
do a show on left versus right, and you know, can you see the right as a bigger threat?
yeah.
We'll
I mean,
think about it. But, you know, he
I used to be thinking that, you know, it didn't really matter which side you voted for. You know, it wasn't a reflection on your personality. It was, but now I'm wondering, like, if you think Biden is better than Vivek or Trump or Nikki Haley or pretty much anybody on the Republican side, I question your sanity. I seriously do.
That's we'll have to turn that into a show. But I mean, look, I think you know, if Yaron gives Nikki Haley a pass for praising Trump, I guess he has to do the same for Vivek. He's sounding somewhat practical there. But by the time of the debates, which he acknowledges Vivek did well on, he's angry with all of the candidates now for not attacking Trump enough.
This is the other very disappointing thing about yesterday. The attacks on Trump were mild. Even Christie was like mild. Like, come on, guys. What do you have to lose? Trump is not going to take Christie as a VP candidate. Go after him. I mean, really go after him. He is a loser.
Just more name calling. He's a loser. Well, he's the biggest, you know, Republican there is right now. I mean, he won the presidency and then got it basically stolen from him through the mail-in ballot frauds. So I think that Yaron doesn't understand something critical here. He doesn't understand the cultural war that's going on. And if you're going to run for the Republican nomination, what is your long range goal? You know, I think your long range goal should be what's good for the nation or for the party, even for the Republican Party. And Yaron doesn't seem to understand that, is that these people are team players. Yaron's not a team player. He's not, I don't think that the Republican candidates should be going nuclear on Trump just because they don't like Trump or they think he's a bad personality or something. If they thought he was actually a bad president, then maybe, go after him.
Some do, but I mean, Yaron's own hate for Trump makes him unable to stay strategic enough not to alienate the base, which he was just advising. He's giving great advice for Biden's reelection.
It sounds like he's campaigning for Biden.
Well, if it can't be Nikki Haley or Tim Scott, what else are you going to do? And
he also wants the Republican candidates to campaign for Biden by going nuclear on Trump. So I don't know. He just hates the Republicans. He doesn't want them to win because they're messing up capitalism. They're like, he has the same motivation that Rand did, I think, for writing the obituary for conservatives, is that they represent capitalism, and so now capitalism is going to get messed up. They're religious, and so now the Republican Party is going to get messed up because of all the religion. It's just he can't get past the negatives on the Republican side, but if he ever did a full comparison of the negatives on the Democratic side and the negatives on the Republican side, he should choose the Republicans. The Democrats are way worse. They're basically taken over by this woke agenda, which is the new religion. So it's the blossoming thing. It's the plant that's growing. It's the man-eating.
Blue America has more culture.
They have sick, disgusting culture.
But ballet and opera.
That's not liberal. That's not Democratic.
We have clips that we'll get into for that. But in that same video, Yaron does think that Vivek won the debate.
There's no question that he won that debate and he got what he wanted out of the debate. I mean, there's no question about that. But because everybody else paled in comparison, and everybody after the debate was only talking about one thing, and that is about Vivek. How long that is sustainable, where they can maintain that, I don't know. But that was the debate yesterday. Was basically Vivek's coming out party. He did a great job at doing it. I mean, he did an awful job actually discussing ideas, but he did a great job at bringing attention to himself.
I wonder what Yaron thinks the debate is, because he says that Vivek drew more attention to himself than the other candidates, and that seems to be why he thinks Vivek won the debate. But that's not what a debate is. That's not what it's about. It's about ideas. It's about arguing. And so if he thinks that Vivek didn't do a good job at the debate, then he didn't win. I mean, it's this whole confusion about the point of going into a debate. And Yaron has this as well. He goes into debate to steal the audience away from the person he's talking to. He doesn't go in to argue or to actually try to persuade people. So you get
arguments that actually win over the audience.
Yeah, and I think Vivek does a good job of actually arguing. But Yaron ignores that because I don't think Yaron's interested in actual ideas or arguing. He's just interested in getting new subscribers for his channel, or that his whole thing is getting clout and getting popularity and that's how you get more money. You get more super chats, but Vivek doesn't seem to be that sort of person. So that's probably why he doesn't appeal to Yaron very much.
Yeah. Well, once Vivek becomes a real contender, I mean, Yaron can't be seen as backing a Republican if he's trying to gain cultural acceptance for moderate lefties. So, it's time to go after Vivek. Yaron starts by calling Vivek pathetic for changing his mind on the January 6th protests and the elections, but then gets into the recent Jacksonville shooting involving a neo-Nazi perp, and he agrees with Vivek. But Yaron seems more upset by Vivek not coming across as empathetic enough.
Jacksonville shooting. He says, the reality is we've created such a racialized culture in this country in the last several years that right as the last few burning embers of racism were burning out, We have a culture in this country largely created by media and establishment and universities and politicians that throw kerosene on that racism. I've been saying that for years. I think that is a driving sadly, a new wave of anti-Black and anti-Hispanic racism in this country. Right? So, I mean, that's all in a sense true. I agree with it. But he never actually came out and said and condemned the racism and just the hatred and the horror of what the guy did in Jacksonville. It's true that this is ultimately the cause.
So Yaron agrees in substance, but he's upset that Vivek didn't express his sympathy or anti-racism bona fides enough. I mean, what kind of virtue signaling needs appropriate condemnations? Identifying the proper cause is part of true empathy. You know, Arafat used to pay lip service to condemning terrorism. I'd rather someone actually get it and be interested in ways of trying to stop race-based or any irrational hate from any direction.
Well, it sounds like Yaron is grasping for excuses to dislike Vivek. I mean, do you really have to go, full out against, racism these days? I mean, isn't it sort of an established evil? I mean, you just talk about how it was evil, and say, "Oh, this was bad," and I condemn it. And what else are you going to do until you get into some sort of authoritative position where you can create policy and do something else about it? I mean, I don't know. I really don't know what Yaron expects from Vivek. It is a true mystery.
Yeah, and we have our own I mean, I have my own skepticism as well. It just I'm not going to turn on him just because he's I mean, Yaron at one point early on said Vivek probably couldn't be nominated, implying the Republican Party was too racist, and then by the end he's accusing Vivek of not being racially sensitive enough.
Maybe he's just projecting. Maybe whenever Yaron says something, one of the first questions I ask myself is he psychologically projecting? And so maybe perhaps we should go back and look at Yaron's responses to these situations and see what he actually did, because he might be projecting his own lack of empathy or sympathy.
Yeah, it's possible. He took some grief on his Wikipedia page. I had to clean that up. But I mean, the bottom line to me is that Yaron has made his choice. To me, he's become so reflexively anti-religion that he's openly declared subjectivism as a better alternative.
I would rather be a subjectivist, anything goes person than a religionist. I just find religion so silly. You just can't take it seriously. If I hadn't discovered objectivism, I'm not sure what I would be, but I would certainly never have gone the religious route.
Well, to know that you wouldn't go a certain route, you would never go a religious route, you have to have some idea of what you would have done. So he doesn't know. If he hadn't found objectivism, he doesn't know where he'd be, but it wouldn't be religious. So that's like the most evil thing, I guess, to him, is being religious.
He inadvertently shows he doesn't truly understand that woke is a religion. He would rather, he doesn't see the subjectivism as a new burgeoning religion. And Rand described religion as a primitive form of philosophy, but this seems more like closed Yaronism.
Yeah. Well, you could almost respect him if he said, "I'd rather be a woke religionist or woke person than a Christian," or something like that, because then at least he'd be getting into particulars. But here he just the most generally abstract comparison. He'd rather be this anything goes subjectivist which could be anything. You know, like what? Okay, so what are you saying? What sort of person would you rather be? You know, some animal who doesn't think. You know, just some unthinking maniac, some psychotic. You know, what is he actually talking about when he says an anything goes subjectivist? That's not a very particular or concrete example. And then even on the other side, he says he wouldn't want to be a religionist. Well, what sort of religionists? You know, there's deists, there's Christians, there's Jews, Muslims. You know, he.
As long as it's atheist, sign him up. Mao Zedong, forget about it.
But he didn't even say atheist. He said anything goes, which could be he could be a God-fearing anything goes person who thinks he's talking. It could be a schizophrenic who thinks he's talking to some God, and so the God tells him to do anything, and then he'll do it. So it doesn't. I don't know what he's actually saying. He'd rather be.
He'd rather be a Biden voter.
Yeah, if he could vote, I guess he'd vote for Biden.
I mean, that's the bottom line. Even with my skepticism of Vivek, you know, I would support him and just about any Republican for that matter over Biden, because I've seen Biden's record and what it's done and how far we've moved away from free markets and free speech and liberty, even since 2021.
Yeah. Well, I like Vivek. There are some red flags. And one thing that bothered me is when he clearly copied Obama. You know, it said, I'm a skinny boy. You know, who's this skinny boy with a funny last name, you know, which is something Obama said. So he either absorbed that comment from Obama because it reflected his own thinking, and so now it's just part of his rhetoric, or he thinks it's a line that's going to win him some Democrats or win him some you know popularity among people who like that sort of thing, because he couldn't have thought that he'd say this line and then people wouldn't remember that Obama said it, right? That would be dumb. But I like to
be on the speechwriters.
But I like to so if someone questioned him about that, like why did he use that line? You know, did he know that Obama said it? I'd like to see I like to see his answer to that question. And I don't know if I haven't seen every video interview he's done. He's basically everywhere now on doing every podcast. So
I think he may be doing a debate with Anomaly.
Oh, really? Well, I'd like someone to bring that up, because it might seem superficial, a superficial question, because it doesn't really matter. He obviously took the line from Obama in some way, osmosis, or some other, like just lying and like deceiving people, trying to deceive people, or plagiarizing Obama. But I'd like to know what his answer is, because then that would give us some indication of his psychology.
Yeah.
And we could analyze his answer. So
a lot's going to come out in the next 4 or 5 months, everything we wanted to know about every one of his positions and even the stuff he's flip-flopping on. So I'm just overall, I would vote for him if he's the nominee. I have concerns. I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open, and I will make the necessary assessments as they come.
Well, let me ask you real quick. Do you think that he's better than Trump? Because Trump has pissed off a lot of people, with his COVID nonsense. Do you think that what Trump did during COVID and, Operation Warp Speed and all that, do you think that disqualifies him now?
But disqualifies him? I'm being somewhat practical about it. Trump is only constitutionally eligible for one more term. And, look, we can say that, he's going to, have all this, that he's going to get done. But I mean, even if he wins, he's going to be in the middle of all of these like indictments against him and sentencing. It's kind of how they took him off the rails before with the Russia investigation. And part of having the potentiality of being in there for 8 years is being able to, hurt your opponents that don't go along with your agenda for a while. And so it does blunt his power. And so that's my main concern. Yes, I have concerns just about the way he handled COVID as well, and the way he has handled his whole campaign. And but I'm not, I probably Chris Christie's the only one I've disqualified in the GOP competition, and Asa Hutchinson.
Yeah, well, I think it's between Trump and Vivek for me.
I was
I'd like
back
to
in
see.
DeSantis early.
Yeah, I don't know about DeSantis.
He just doesn't have the momentum yet.
He doesn't seem. First of all, he doesn't seem that interested in the campaign. So to me, he's just sort of like on the sidelines almost.
Yeah.
And
We could do a whole DeSantis episode as well.
Yeah, and then second of all, I don't know if he can win. He doesn't seem to be the type that will gain as many votes as Trump did.
I disagree, and I base it on the number of people that moved to Florida and gave him a much bigger majority in 2022 than he had in 2018.
Well, he's certainly going to have to impress much more of the Republican base, because he's almost losing now to Vivek.
Yeah, it's because Trump has been, he's had his foot on his neck. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But yeah, again, I think we could do one of these episodes on each of the major candidates as we start knowing who they're going to be. So I'll look forward to that. Any final thoughts on Vivek?
I just wanted to say that one thing that impressed me in the interview he did with Alex Epstein, he said that everyone should read Alex's book, Fossil Future. And he actually, by the time the interview happened, he had read the first 3 chapters and he really liked it. And so it sounds like he's on board with the climate change issue, and Alex's take on it and all of that. So I think it's a good sign that he responded to Alex's book like that. And I think there are a lot of other good signs, and people who are skeptical about Vivek should look at that interview that Alex did with him.
Great, we'll put a link to it.
Yeah, because this was before, I think this was before he started running for president. Okay. And so it goes more into his book about the woke culture. And that's why Alex was interviewing him, because Alex loved an idea that Vivek had, and how to challenge and compete against companies like BlackRock who are trying to turn, the culture into this woke nonsense. So I think if you're really interested in understanding Vivek, look at that interview as well. It's not all about him copying a line from Obama, or not giving a clear answer on his past with the Soros brothers and all of that. It's more about, to me, it's more about what drives this man. What is his cognitive function like? How does he see the world? Is there potential for great change with him in the right direction, and that sort of thing? I don't know if he's completely honest, or fibbing here and there, but I think on some of the major topics and major issues, he sounds really good, and I like the direction he's going.
Great, good analysis. We'll keep doing more political shows as it gets closer to the election, I'm sure. In the meantime, I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.